here we go with today, October 14th. We have 5 things you need to know from DestiMetrics Inntopia. So today, number 1, I'm going to talk specifically about the ski industry. I'll let Tom talk about fun things like inflation and unemployment and so forth. But when we look at what's going on in the national headlines around ski, the talk is about, well, really creativity and resiliency in the ski industry and what's to come for this season. So I really like the quote that you see there from Nathan Rafferty at Ski Utah that talked about resorts that were incredibly creative and resilient and how they dealt with the pandemic. Innovations to enhance the guest experience while keeping everyone safe and weathering the challenges from last year. So we anticipate it to be a less restrictive year when it comes to operations. So the 3 things that we're seeing is operation plans being announced, as well as a lot of talk about capital improvements, snowmaking, and opening days. So Vail Resorts was one of the first to announce operating procedures for this season, and they are not doing reservations for skiing, and many have announced similar plans. They in particular are requiring proof of vaccine for quick service restaurants. We haven't heard that from many others, but I think overwhelmingly ski resorts are requiring vaccinations for staff. So we're hearing that more and more. And in fact, not just in the ski industry, but in other large national corporations. So keep an eye out for more and more of those operating plans to become public. Other things, well, I guess Alterra, of course, being the one of the 2 large ski companies now, they are taking more of a individual approach to their operating plans. So you'll see that it's maybe changes from resort to resort. No reservations, however, except maybe in Jackson Hole, where you see that they have a capacity limit and will require reservations for Icon Pass holders and Mountain Collective pass holders. Other things, just quickly, would be opening days and snowmaking. So there's some Colorado resorts are on the cusp of opening, and then big announcements on capital improvements and what's going to be open for skiers to enjoy this winter. So that's what we're seeing in the headlines for ski. And now over to Tom for number 2.
Thank you, Katie. And nice of you to tee up inflation and stuff as the exciting and interesting stuff. I appreciate it. Number 2, inflation. It is likely going to be a thing. We talked a little while ago about what inflation was or wasn't going to be, and most folks were expecting it to settle down later on in the year, but there are issues relating to energy crisis that are driving up inflation strongly. So consumer prices went up earlier this week, reported out 5.3% gain in September compared to September last year. So at 5.3%, inflation is really at the highest level it's been at any time since the recession, going back to July 2008. And that is led largely by energy, up 24.8% year over year. And one of the questions is, well, why do we care? Obviously, dramatically higher energy costs mean an expensive winter for consumers. That probably eats into available money that they've got in their pockets, but it also means you've got to heat your lodging properties in winter resorts, and that's going to be harder. You got to keep the lights on. That's going to be harder to do. Some lodging providers may choose to look for surcharges or other ways to recover some of that, which is probably going to have an impact on already very high rates. So inflation is likely going to stick around a little bit longer than we anticipated, than the Fed anticipated, and it will have some other economic consequences that we'll talk about a little bit later. But it's going to be a thing. So that's our number 2. Number 3, inflation's got nothing on room rates. It's the way we look at it, and we've been talking about room rates and how strong they are for quite a while. But if we look at what I'm terming for purposes of this discussion, room inflation over the course of 2 years, it's outpaced national consumer inflation by 551%. back in September, last month. And it's 340% higher than the inflation rate for winter ahead. And Katie kind of touched on that a little bit, but if inflation is at 5% and a room is at a 5% gain in inflation, and a room is 25% more expensive this year than last year, that's a 500% difference between the two. And that comes down to conversations about relativity. So what? So what? This is great. We're getting a lot of money, and I agree with that. I can't complain, and the downsides are hard to find, but there are some concerns around it. It creates buffers in the revenue stream, but it creates threats as well, because we can end up doing things like making ourselves economically isolated, dependent upon a smaller consumer group, becoming viewed as exclusive or elite as a product, rather than opening up to a broader usage and participation. So there are concerns. The chart here is showing you that sort of comparison between the change in ADR and the annual inflation rate. It does settle down over the course of the winter as we get further into the winter and further ahead, assuming that inflation stays where it is right now going forward. But it is a thing, that's for sure. So you actually got two economic things right at the top of that. Number 4, Saturday Christmas and New Year's in 21. Yes, it's falling on a Saturday. We've been looking for this for a long time. That has an impact on when school breaks come out and when people go on break, when they return to school, and so forth. So, shifts in school calendars really are driving very strong gains throughout December, but especially right around Christmas and the week between Christmas and New Year's, and the week following as well. And that all has to do with Christmas and New Year's falling on a Saturday and school calendars shifting around to accommodate that. Plus, it's just a natural inclination to look at Saturday as Christmas, and nobody has to go back to work the day after, by way of example. And so, along with pent-up demand and pandemic fatigue, these shifts are really driving record room rates and earlier than ever holiday bookings, which we'll talk about a lot. But you see some of that in the chart on the right here, where as we look forward into the winter season, room nights booked are actually up very strongly for all of the upcoming months that we've got so far through to March, and with a little bit of a dip in January only. The rest of them are looking really good. And that's driven by these factors of pent-up demand and pandemic fatigue, but shifts in calendars as well make it easier for people to book. And lastly, our number 5, as we've been doing DestiMetrics data, and just a quick overview of the seasons. It's all in the green. Summer to date, looking at occupancy, ADR, and RevPAR versus 2020 are up 50%, 23%, and 85% respectively. And versus 2019, up 1%. We'll have a conversation about that again this month in a minute. Up 33% on ADR and 34% on RevPAR versus pre-pandemic 2019. So that's fantastic. And those measurements versus 2020 and versus 2019 are at the same time in those years. So the decline that happened at the end of the 2019 season, 2019-20 season, has not yet materialized in the data we're comparing to here. Hadn't yet come to pass. And winter on the books, occupancy, ADR, and RevPAR, 75% up, 26% up, and 120 year over year. Looking ahead, and up 16, 19, and 38% versus pre-pandemic. My comments about the declines being included or not included in the 2-year comparison should have been applied to this data set down here. So just to clear up confusion. One thing that isn't confusing is that this is all very, very strong, very positive. Obviously the mountain destination travel market has benefited to some extent, in as much as an industry can during times like this, from its various geography, where it's located in the mountains, away from urban centers where people want to go to. Plus, of course, the quality of the product speaks for itself, and the efforts of all of you on the calls and your compatriots in towns have really gone towards making this all happen.